Good morning, everybody from Melbourne. I know that most of you are probably not in my time zone, but as I speak, the sun is coming up. Apologies if I cover anything that somebody else has talked about. While I love learning and I love facilitating, I also love sleep, and I didn't catch the beginning of the conference. Okay, just making sure I've got my hands right and can change slides. I'm currently a product designer at a company called MakerX. We design and build products for ventures and startups. And, I've been doing this for a long time. And as part of that, I facilitate a lot of workshops, as most designers do. I even wrote a wrote a book on facilitation. It was on Amazon for 10 days before my publisher folded. So now it's sitting in InDesign on my computer, waiting for me to do something about it. It was a good one. I liked it. I just have to figure out how to find time to do something about it. Today, I'm going to hone in on a particular kind of workshop activity, which is around the part where we generate ideas. So in the last talk, the part where you hit the peak of that storytelling, that kind of peak activity of actually coming up with the ideas. So this, and the reason I thought we would talk about this is that these activities are something that we do in lots of kinds of workshops. Like a lot of the things we do involve something where the core of the workshop is to create something new. So sometimes I do an idea generation workshop as like the whole thing, with only kind of small amounts of like context setting and prioritization and and the rest. Sometimes it's an activity in part of a something broader. And what we the idea here, the goal is to have the group come up with, I put creative in brackets because, it's not craft, it's not like art kind of creative, but like, new and modern ideas for that achieve that context and workshop goal. So some of the examples of this kind of workshop and activity that I've done is, I did one a while back where we were trying to figure out how we might apply new technology to increase output in a factory without reducing staff. I've done idea generation around how to reduce the amount of waste going to landfill, which is a big idea. I've got one next week with my team around how can we increase team engagement. I've done like really product specific ones, like how do we do a dashboard for a particular billing product. Another product kind of idea of like how do we improve navigation for this e-learning platform. So the idea generation can be something quite big in scope, like reducing waste, or literally let's work on this particular part of a product. And the principles apply no matter whether you're trying to tackle something large or small. I'm just going to cover some examples so that I didn't just say idea generation. You're like, what's she talking about? The thing that I think is difficult about this type of workshop or type of activity is that it can be quite hard to get people to create like new ideas, like to come up with something creative, interesting, something that hasn't been thought of before. And it also can be hard to get good ideas. And I don't like to say, people don't create good ideas, because like we get ideas out of the room, but there are all kinds of things that like a poor structure or poor facilitation can mean that we get things that have just like been thought of before, when we usually want like new things and stretching and really like try to come up with something better. So I've certainly been in workshops where, the ideas that came out were like, yeah, fine, kind of all things that existed in the world. And certainly the thing that when I both teach facilitation and run workshops, I find the thing that people struggle most with is actually like what do we do with those ideas? How do we select things either in the workshop structure, or how do we select things to go forward with? I'm going to touch on that because it's a thing that people struggle with, but it's not really the core of the idea generation step. But it's something everybody has a hard time with. Why? And I was also thinking about, why do people, like, why is it hard for people to do this in a workshop? And sometimes it's because they've never experienced this before. They don't know what it's about. They are scared. You're asking them to do something new, and like they just don't have the experience to deal with it. Sometimes it's because they're worried about being judged, that their ideas are going to be judged by their colleagues or peers. We squash ourselves quite a lot because we're worried about what people think about us. I've certainly had a lot of experience where people are kind of blocked in a workshop because they've done this before and nobody listened to me. And that will certainly stop them from putting, full energy in. And another kind of related to not having the experience, but a bit more specific, is that you've given them an activity to do and they literally don't have the skill to do it. So I'm going to talk about that a bit as well. Like, they literally are like, oh, okay, you've asked me to sketch. I don't know how to draw. You've asked me to like make something with craft. I don't know how to do that. That's not my thing. You've asked me to like draw a storyboard. I don't know what that is. And I've seen a ton of workshops where people, like, you ask them to do something. Actually, this is usually workshops other people have facilitated. I know how to do this. that was arrogant, wasn't it? I've seen where people have been asked to do things and I watch their face and they go, and like they really just like lock down because they're like, crap, I don't know how to do that. And then that's terrifying. And you can lock them off for the whole workshop just because you've asked them to do something that is too much of a stretch for their skills. So let's look at some methods. I know we probably all have lots of methods in our toolbox, but these are some that I think work fairly well and reliably for me, that I like to use often in this kind of activity. And some caveats around some of them as well. So we often do brainstorming, where the idea is you say, create, it's basically create stuff, and whatever, with some kind of instruction around that stuff. The idea in a brainstorm is that you create the stuff without also judging the stuff at the same time. The challenge with this as a workshop activity is, like what I said before, a lot of people haven't done it before. They've never done a brainstorm. Like, I mean, if we're working with other designers or our product teams close, we've probably done it with them. But when I'm doing workshops with like members of the general public, subject matter experts, they've probably not done it. So they don't know about how to not critique as they go. And they don't know kind of what you mean by like just kind of get stuff out of their head. So this isn't necessarily a great method unless you use it as part of other things, or help people understand, give them some practice in actually getting the skill. It's good for getting what's already in people's heads kind of out onto the table, but you won't usually get like mad creative ideas out of a general brainstorm, but it can be a part of an activity. One that I like to use a lot, I don't know if this has a label from somewhere else. Sometimes I worry that I'm explaining a method that somebody has actually like come up with a long time ago and I should be referencing it, but I've done things for so long that I like lose the source. So this might have actually another title. I call it keyword combinations. And this method, the way it works is you give them kind of 3 categories and like things within the categories, and ask them to create an idea that uses all three things. So an example of that might be that you have like 3 ideas from the brainstorm, or you have a pile of ideas from the brainstorm, or you have a pile of ideas from the workshop topic, or you've got a pile of kind of topics to work with. I often, because I work in technology, I will often then say, here are a pile of technologies. So on the screen, I've got like AI and ChatGPT and drones and beacons. You might, choose a pile of technologies, including like paper and pen, or, they don't have to be all new technologies. And then you can give them a pile of adjectives as well. So fast and slow and funny. The idea of the activity is that you give them one thing from each and say, you must come up with an idea that uses all three. And it doesn't have to be like, you'll often have to tell people this isn't what we're necessarily going to run with or build, but it helps them start to kind of break out of their current thinking and come up with new things. So I use this one a lot. I use it a lot with kind of like fun and silly and adjectives that help people realize that this isn't like super serious, that they can come up with weird things. So this is one of my favorites. You might have heard of a like really big combo method called Scamper. And what Scamper is an acronym for a bunch of things that you can do within an idea generation method. So you can take a thing, so again, it might be something that the workshops come up with earlier. It might be a topic related to the goal of the workshop, and you can use one of these parts of speech, verbs, to do something else. So you might say, okay, you've already thought of a chocolate cake. What would that look like if you multiplied it? So you come up with a regular chocolate cake, and then you've got a 3-tiered chocolate cake. You've got a chocolate cake. What would you do? What would that look like if you put it to another use? And you can imagine the kinds of things that people might come up with there. What if you eliminate part of it? What if you take the chocolate out of the chocolate cake? What would you come up with then? So these are, you can use this in lots of ways. This is a really flexible kind of way to do things. And I feel like this one takes a bit of practice to like explain to people, and especially in a topic that's more conceptual than chocolate cakes. But is a good one again for kind of pushing people to start with something and make something from it. My very favorite kind of specific version of the R in Scamper. So sometimes it means, what I put on there, rearrange, but often it means reverse. This is one I use a lot, and it's where you ask people to actually reverse the thing, or like to create the worst possible idea. And the thing that's really neat about this method is it like breaks down barriers, it gets people laughing, it helps them to start creating and knowing that this thing isn't the thing that we're going to like actually put into production, that they're creating things as part of the activity. So it's a really good one to do early on when you're trying to just get people warmed up into creation. The example that I have on the screen is one that I used in a workshop a long time ago, and I asked the group to come up with ideas to make airport security worse. And one of my friends, and like I cannot get this out of my head, one of my friends came up with this idea that we could make everybody like strip off all their clothes and put on hospital gowns. So in my head was like everybody running through the airport with their, backsides hanging out. And, it just like totally broke the ice. And after, like, it also bonded the group really well because everybody laughed so hard at this idea and came up with really, really just crazy stuff. And God, I just saw the whole thing just go, oh, we're all right here. We can do weird things. We're safe. And then they, you know, created really well. So I use this a lot. Sometimes I'll put it in and go, nah, this one doesn't quite fit what I want to achieve here. I don't want to, sometimes like serious work topics, I don't want to bring the energy right down, but it's good in lots of contexts. Another is a thing I call, I've seen this both called collaborative sketching and brainwriting. I think brainwriting comes from gamestorming. I'm not sure where collaborative sketching came from. The idea here is that somebody comes up with an idea, like it can be part of like any other activity. It can be part of just like a brainstorm, and they give it to somebody else. So you might pass it to the person on your right in a physical space. You might give it to somebody else in an online equivalent, and they have to build on that idea. So here we start with the chocolate cake, we give it to somebody else, and they turn it into a cheesecake with chocolate topping. The good thing about this one is that it gets people interacting, and it's good if you need to kind of make a group work really well together. But it also helps people to build on other people's ideas. If you're ever with a group where you're pretty sure people are going to come in with their idea and they're going to run with their idea right through the workshop, and I've certainly seen this happen, then having them, like forcing them to work with each other, it can be really good. So, and you can do as many rounds of this as you want to build on it. So it helps them like listen and work with other people. And then a similar one is a thing that I think is often called conversational sketching. These are weird titles, but I wanted to include them so that you can go reference them and find out a bit more. And here is similar. You come up with your idea, debrief with the group and share the idea with the group. And then for the next round, you build on your own idea, but you have to include something that you've heard within that group. So here we've got, like, you know, example, come up with chocolate, you come up with waffles, and you know, combine those to make chocolate waffles. Again, like the previous one of the advantages is getting people to listen to each other, and kind of forcing them to take on things that other people have come up with, rather than just like running hard with their own thing. I was just checking chat. There wasn't anything that I really should pay attention to. Something that I see go wrong in lots of workshops is that people put a lot of effort into that idea generation step, and then you're left with a big pile of half-baked thoughts. Some of them might be really good half-baked thoughts, but they're like just ideas. Like they're just like, you know, a wall of things, and you're looking at them and you're like, most of these are, I'm really glad people came up with weird and crazy, but most of these are completely not viable, or most of them aren't thought through because they're brainstormed, and most of them like wouldn't work. So a super important part of the idea generation is to take the ideas and actually then like put some pressure on them, define them out, build them further, see if they, I always say, see if they have legs. I don't know if that's an Australianism though, but see if there's some substance to them. So some methods that I often use for this is, one way I do it is to do this newspaper from the future activity. I think this has a couple of titles in different sources as well. But the idea here is that you ask people to tell a story about what happened 3 to 5 years from now with this idea. So if they've come up with a new product feature or a new product, or you know, anything that's come out, you can say, okay, well, like, just project yourself to the future where this thing's a success, it's in the world, and write a newspaper story about it. The advantage of this is it helps people think through like what the effect of their idea might have on the world. It helps them to think a little bit more deeply about it, and it gives, you know, the group a chance to see, oh, okay, that's what they were thinking with that. The challenge with this one very much is that it is absolutely one of those activities that people can go, oh, I can't do that, because they're worried that they have to, like, you know, be really like creative and draw the newspaper story. So I always give people a lot of ways to do this. They can write some dot points. They can like tell a narrative. They can draw a newspaper story if they like, but I've found a lot of people are like, that's the bit I don't want to do. Sometimes I give it a bit more structure with some kind of headings for things to think about, so they can just do those dot points. And as long as I, you know, reduce that, or, oh my God, I can't possibly draw a newspaper story, people can get into it. This is where online tools can be really good, because you can give them like a pile of like illustrations and stuff, and they can just drag them in, where when we're doing things in person, you know, with a Sharpie, and that's all they've got, they're like, I don't want to do this. Yeah, I like this for online because they can assemble their story without worrying about the drawing skill. Another way can be to take that idea and put it into a person doing a thing or a day in a life, like to actually storyboard or scenario it out. The advantage of this one is that people have to think about like how their idea actually works, how people interact with it, what actually happens step by step. The challenge, of course, absolutely, is that people will freeze when they think they have to draw a storyboard. So again, this is another one that I'll say, you don't have to draw, you can like tell it as a story, like tell it as a day in the life, what happens when somebody gets up, what happens next, what happens next. So the idea is that they like flesh the idea out, and the like the artifact isn't the important thing. Again, I don't want them stopping because they're like, I don't know how to do, I can't do the drawing. I did just find this cool. Well, I was just like looking for an illustration for this slide, and I like storyboard making a cake because I had cake examples. And I found this tool called storyboardthat.com, which I don't think I would use in a workshop because there's like that extra load of learning new software. But I thought this was like pretty cool for like doing other kind of storyboard things. So that one works really nicely, consistently, and helps people like really flesh their idea out. Another method that I use and that I've seen used a fair bit successfully is like a simple elevator pitch, is to take the idea and to like go that bit deeper by writing an elevator pitch. And this is a structure that I've used a bit. I don't always use the whole structure. And the structure is for a user or customer who has a particular need. The idea is that, unlike a closest competitor, and it's got a differentiator. So, and the structure helps people think through the parts of the idea. Sometimes I won't use a structure and just get them to kind of write a, you know, a 2-minute description of it. But sometimes structure can help a group think through what they need to do here. So I've got cats who want some attention. So as I said, one of the hard things in this idea generation kind of activities and workshops is, what do we do with the stuff now that we've come up with it? So let's have a look at some kind of methods for selecting ideas. The important thing about this is that this needs to be part of your workshop planning. So you need to think about how you're going to make the selections when you're actually planning the structure of the workshop. And you need to communicate that to the group so that they know like how the whole process will work. What will happen to my things? What will happen to my contribution? how are we going to do this? And a lot of that is like, how will I be listened to? How will I be treated fairly? How will my, energy here actually turn into something useful? So they really need to understand how the selection's going to work. And so a lot of this is then understanding what was the purpose of running the activity? What are you trying to achieve from this? Because like your selection methods really are the part that will, help achieve that goal. Some of them I'm about to show need some criteria that you're going to measure against. They could be done before the workshop as part of the planning, or they might be an activity in themselves in the workshop to actually come up with the assessment criteria. And that is a hard activity to do. I've always found groups really get stuck on the measurement criteria. So it's good to like really plan that activity carefully, so that you'll end up with like both really good ideas and a really good assessment method that everybody is in agreement with. But man, that causes some arguments. So let's look at some methods. One that I see a lot of people do is like this simple 2x2. And often the axes are something like value to the customer, value to the business, maybe, and like the difficulty or cost, or like how hard is this thing. I think this is a fine way of starting some thinking, but I think it is not rich enough to actually really make solid decisions. It's probably okay for if you're like just kind of thinking about the next features in your product, and you go, well, this one's really high value for the customer and we can do it easily. Let's start there. But, you certainly wouldn't want to do this with how do we reduce the amount of waste going to landfill. So think about whether the method is appropriate to what you're trying to select. But it's a fine and easy one, and people can understand it. One that I use a lot is like a criteria scoring method. So I've also seen this referenced as controlled convergence, which I don't know what that title means, but it's a good way to like reference it and find it later. And in this, you come up with a bunch of criteria that matter for your decision. They might have some weightings, so some might be weighted more heavily than others. And then individuals score the ideas against the criteria. I really like this because it forces you to think about the criteria and like how you're making decisions. As I said before, though, those criteria can be crazy hard to actually agree with in a group. I also once made a mistake of, I was doing this remotely and I made the mistake, I set it all up in a spreadsheet so that people could like type in their scores, but they could see the results spreadsheet as it was being assembled. And I totally had people overblow their scores to push towards the thing that they wanted to achieve. And I'm like, aha, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to make it completely like invisible so they can't see the scores as they're generated. But yeah, you have to be, and we made a pretty big decision off this one. And I still think it was probably the wrong decision because people manipulated it a bit hard. But it gives more rigor to a decision-making process than like just popping it on a 2x2. So it's good for when you need to have some rigor or also explain later on why you made a particular decision. I see teams do Moscow a lot. I feel like this comes from Google or somewhere. And Moscow is just, what things must we do? What things should we do? What things could we do? And what things won't we do? So you've got a pile of ideas. You talk about them in the team and decide which category they go in. The super important things are the ones that go into the won't column. Like that's again a hard conversation to have, to say we're not doing that for these reasons, but is actually probably the most value out of this activity is identifying and discussing and having people be heard about why you're not going to do a particular thing. Forced ranking is just like sequencing things. So you might not do this as the whole selection mechanism. You might have a bunch of dimensions, and you just like talk through the sequencing. So you might say, this is going to be easy to do. This is going to be hard. Let's like sequence them. You could do the value to the business. You could do the value to the customer. Which ones are those? And have that discussion about each of the dimensions. So you this won't like give you one answer, but it certainly helps the team talk through the value of those ideas. And don't look at my example. I threw everything in randomly. Red velvet cake probably costs more than lemon drizzle cake. Just going to put all that red in it. I've used divide the dollar as well. This one can feel a bit trivial, but can help people like kind of just think through priorities. In this, you have the features, you give people $100 and they have to allocate their money across the features. It helps them think through what is the value, and you can use this with criteria as well. So you can use it like without just say allocate $100 to the things you think are most important. But you could, you know, give a criteria like value or cost. Again, another good discussion method to help people think things through. Dot voting is the one that I see most people do, and I left this to the last for a reason, because I think dot voting is a terrible way of making any selection decision. And the reason, clearly I've said this at when I've taught lots of workshops, and people are like, what? I like dot voting, and they feel really like upset because they dot vote, and I've just said it's terrible. So here's why I don't like doing dot voting. I've often seen it when people are trying to create features or something for a product, and you've done different variations of what a dashboard might look like. Dot voting leans towards things that are easy to comprehend, things that look good, and often like who created them. So they're not like actually your decision. They shouldn't be your decision criteria. Like looks good, I understand it, and the boss created it are not your criteria, but they're like, that's what influences people when they're doing dot voting. So I often see like not very good ideas get voted highly for those reasons. The other thing you really have to have with dot voting to make it kind of valuable is that the ideas are at the same kind of level of granularity. And what I see with people do a lot is some will vote on like this whole cluster of an idea, and some will vote on an individual feature. And you're like, well, what does that mean? What are we actually voting on? And they get all tangled up. So I think it's too shallow to be able to use for like good idea selection. And I think I've given you a bunch of other methods there that I think are much better, that help you make thoughtful decisions rather than this kind of quite shallow one. So this has no place in my toolbox. I don't have any dots in my box anymore, and I avoid using them on online workshops as well. I'm not looking at the chat to see what the reaction might have been to that. I'll have a look in a moment. Just some last points about helping people actually feel like they can be involved. As I said, I would come back to skills builders earlier. One way that you can help people to like actually feel comfortable, skilled, is when you're doing a warm-up, you can do a warm-up that relates to skills that they might use later on the main activity. So if you know that you're going to ask people to do, you know, some kind of small drawing activity, include a little warm-up activity around drawing, or include like one where they learn to draw. If you're going to get them to do a good brainstorm later on, get the warm-up, like I mean right beginning of the day when they're getting to know each other. Get them to do like to practice a little brainstorm with no critique. So they're like, okay, cool. Oh, that was fun. I did that. I feel like I've achieved something. It'll also include like actual skills builders deliberately within your structure. So you can do this at any time, but you can give them a mini brainstorm that is unrelated to the main topic. So they learn how to brainstorm and not critique at the same time. So that might just be a 5-minute brainstorm as many cakes as you can. You can do skills builders around like generating kind of the weird ideas. So reversal is a good one of that. But something, again, it might be like unrelated to the topic, so they can become comfortable creating things that are like that are a stretch, that they know they're not going to be judged on. And skills build, like sketching is certainly the one where people like go, oh, I can't do that, I can't sketch. So you can do some like sketching skills building activities. The caveat on this is that so a lot of facilitators will do like how to build up simple drawings up out of simple shapes. I don't think that's enough to then have people be comfortable trying to sketch later on. It's not enough of a skill builder. Sketching is something that people deeply feel like they can't do. So instead of asking them to sketch and thinking that you can teach them how to sketch, give them just alternatives for all activities that involve potentially picking up a Sharpie and drawing on something. I think skills builders are like a facilitator's superpower. Otherwise, you can help people to contribute better is to make groups quite small so that they're not worried about that social pressure of being judged by a large group. And also making sure that you introduce a turn-taking method so that people know that there's a way to get heard and so that they actually get heard. And that will, like, once they see that happening, they're like, oh, cool, I actually will be listened to. Therefore, I better turn my brain on and have something to contribute. Thank you very much. I will now look at the chat and see what kinds of questions you have. And timing is good. And I can now take some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. Yeah, so if you have questions, either raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Do we divide the dollar with Australian dollars? Totally. I totally want you to make everybody do a currency conversion in the activity.
Yeah, from Canadian to Australian dollars. There's going to be a mixed up.
I really think, yes. We can have some half-baked cakes. I'm just going to go backwards now properly. Silly chocolate AI.
So Matea has a question.
Yeah, and I have somebody mentioned Thinker Toys. I've got the, I wonder if anyway, I've got the books. Oh, here we go. This is a I would have bought this from Amazon a good while ago. So there's a book called Thinker Toys, and they have this deck. I've got quite a lot of decks. I like them. They're good for like just thinking of different methods and, you know, and figuring out ways of doing things that I haven't done before. So
I'll put the link in the chat. Matea has a question. Any suggestions of how much time is needed for these type of conversations? Minimum?
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's a really, really good question. This is an activity that should be given lots of breathing room. That you know, if we're again thinking about the conversation structure of a workshop, if you saw the last talk, this is the peak. This is the important part. So what happens if you constrain it is people are like really, you know, in flow, coming up with ideas, feeling great, feeling energetic, feeling positive, and then you shut them down. And they're like, I didn't finish. And what will happen if they didn't finish is their ideas will leak into the following activities. So this is the one where in your workshop structure, you want to give lots of space around it. Don't time box idea generation or idea development. Like don't try to push artificial time constraints on that, because you then constrain people, and this is the time when you want them to not be constrained.
What do you think about the some time constraint, but allowing for more time? Or you're just specifically saying just let it be free? Like, hey, let's go for another 5 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
No, there's something that at least
Look,
in my experience.
Yeah, you have to fit it into the workshop, and you have to give people the instruction around what's the expectation here. So I might say, we've got 20 minutes for this, so that people know whether they should be feeling pressured, whether they should, like, you know, they get into the feel of how this activity is going to run. So at 20 minutes, give them the timer. And then both online and in person, I'll watch the progress of the activity, because you can see the activity energy. You can see them start, you can see them kind of figuring out what they're doing. You can see them like actually doing most of the creation, and you can see when they're winding down, and you can see that online as well, because you can see the amount of activity happening. So I keep an eye on it so that I don't cut them off mid-thought, or like when they're really kind of jazzed. This is the kind of flexible bit in a workshop where you really want to make sure that that you know, they have the time for it. Yes, so definitely, here's the amount of time we're having. You look like you're still, you know, going solidly. I'll give you 5 more minutes.
Yeah. Right. What other questions, Benoit?
Yeah, I'm trying to have a question every time. Being a facilitator, you know, I'm trying to help facilitators. Yeah, let's go on the dot. I love the dot voting in my part, but the way that I'm using it, if it's online, and we mentioned that with Myro, it could be, you know, people don't see how the dots are coming or the votes are coming. So
yeah,
that's one way to do it, because then
I've noticed Miro do that now.
Yeah, well, we mentioned that I think earlier today, but it's something that just pop at one point, and there's no less of a move effect with people who are trying to vote. When it's physical, I still love them, but I've tried to have people place their ideas differently and all at the same time, so that you don't get the highest paid people in the room effect. So someone having an idea and being the boss. But yeah, people kind of know the handwriting and stuff like that. But I'd still have dots, and I'm still using it. So
that's okay. But
trying to defend it
like
publicly. So there's a place for dots.
You've
and brainstorming.
Through
sorry.
The issues around the activity. And so that's good. I'm going to be black and white, you know, because I'm often teaching people for the first time about facilitation, who just kind of default to a thing, and the thing isn't effective if you haven't like thought about how to do it really well.
True.
That's why I'm a bit like, you know, blunt about it.
But it makes sense, and you knew it was coming, so we love our dots. And the brainstorming, I don't like you. I didn't like it in general, but I think that people working together alone, which also we mentioned before, is kind of a way for it to be still applicable. But, I agree with you on the brainstorming. It's the first one people think of, and it's not always the best. But there's a way to work with it. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. 2 Canadian cents, which is 1.5 Canadian Australian cents. Just kidding. We don't have 10 cents anymore.
You don't have 10 cents anymore?
No, the physical cents, they're gone. Like the small 1 cent. Anyway, sorry. Dollar story.
Oh, we only have, like, our smallest is 5 cents. Yeah, we don't have 1s and 2s.
Same here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Couple more questions in the chat, or statements, and then there's a question.
I can see, have I seen facilitating through Lego Serious Play online? I haven't seen anybody do that. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I just haven't seen it. I think it would be possible. You just have to think about what the elements are that people are working with. Because a lot of Lego Serious Play method is about humans working together. But yeah, we need to see that. What else have we missed?
People are very about the dot voting. it is subjective, but a lot of times I think, the subjectivity is good to make sure for shared understanding, not necessarily use data, but just to get on the same page sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Sometimes I'm going to be inflammatory to make people think.
Yeah. All right. What other questions do you have? What are some of the mistakes that you see the facilitators make, or people that are trying to get better at facilitating? What are some common mistakes that you see?
I think the most common that I've been subjected to as a participant is that skills builder thing, is that facilitators, expect that people understand what this is all about and have the skills, including drawing skills, to do the activities. So somebody mentioned, I think I saw the end of David's talk, and I think he mentioned, actually, so somebody mentioned, this might have been yesterday, the curse of knowledge. I don't know if it came up yesterday or today. The curse of knowledge, where you can't imagine what it's like once you already know how to do a thing. If you know how to sketch, it's hard to imagine how it feels not to know how to sketch. If you know how to brainstorm, it's hard to know what it feels like to go, I don't know what to do here. So I think that's something that I've seen most when I've been in sessions, is facilitators not thinking through, like, what do my audience know? And the previous talk had that in a chunk in the diagram of, like, understanding the audience and where they're coming from. And that way you can go, what are these group going to know? If I'm working with a group of designers or, product people, most of them will be fine picking up a pen. Subject matter experts, members of the public, are probably not super comfortable drawing in front of people.
Yeah. Great. Couple more questions. What are some difficulties you experience while facilitating for ideas generation?
Loads. I still do all of this, set up my sessions really well. I think have a good set of methods available to me, know when to use them. And sometimes still I will facilitate a group who just can't come up with things well. And sometimes I can unpack why, sometimes it's interpersonal stuff, sometimes it's skills, sometimes the topic is too hard. But this is a hard thing to come up with new ideas. So it's just actually the really hard bit. And good planning and good skills building and good structure helps with it all, but sometimes still a group will be fail. There's a question on tips for guidance on co-facilitation. I haven't done a lot of co-facilitation because usually I'm just working with one group at a time. When I have, I usually get the co-facilitator to do the job of monitoring people and making sure that they've understood the instruction and keeping an eye on whether they're managing the skills.
Great. I think that's this.
Yeah, and Iris made a really good point at the end about being inclusive and thinking about how people can be involved who are not easily going to contribute to a rapid-paced, real-time facilitation environment. So yeah, that's a really important part of thinking about how to run a workshop, is how do I include people who this style of workshop is not going to work with their brain.